Hello, you're listening to Linguistically Aware, a 30-minute conversation-based podcast about the ways we use, understand, and think about language. My name is Dusan. I'm a grad student of linguistics at the University of Calgary, and I'm sitting down with linguists, experts who study language, to talk about a number of roles language plays in our lives. This is CJSW 90.9 FM broadcasting on the traditional territories of all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 of Southern Alberta. Today, I talked to Svitlana Winters, who teaches a course Language and Advertising at the University of Calgary. We talked about her course, what makes language and advertising special, and why we fall for the tricks used in advertising. So listen and enjoy. Hello, Svitlana. You teach a course at the University of Calgary called Language and Advertising. So why don't we start with that one? What is this course about?
So the course Language and Advertising is basically intended to provide students with the understanding of persuasive power of language as it is used in advertising. It focuses on some concepts from psycholinguistics, pragmatic, and sociolinguistics. So I believe this course has been offered for over a decade now at the U of C, and it was originally designed and developed by a truly inspiring professor, Dr. Julie Sadovy, and I had the privilege of being her teaching assistant several times in this course. But later I took over and I started teaching this course myself. And well, obviously I adapted it based on my research interests and my experience. But a lot of the content of the course as I teach it comes from the book written by Julie Sadovy and Greg Carlson called Sold on Language. And I guess this course was when I first started thinking, or what made me start thinking, that perhaps some linguistic knowledge and skills are in demand in other areas of knowledge, like, for example, in marketing. And this is really what drove me and inspired me to try myself in marketing research. And that's where I am right now.
That sounds interesting, really. Why is the language of marketing or advertising so interesting?
Well, I feel that the language of advertising is interesting because, well, for a number of reasons, really. So, first of all, we live in the world where advertisements proliferate, right? And they are everywhere we go. And so people have trained themselves to ignore them or to at least push them somewhere to the periphery of their attention. And so people working in advertising have to become very creative to learn how to capture the attention of their audience. And so they are so creative in many ways, including in terms of language use. And as a result, so right now I'm talking as a linguist, right? So for me, studying language in advertising is interesting because there are some really interesting and innovative formations appearing in advertisements. Some linguists would probably refer to them as products of extra grammatical morphology, like, words like blends, for example, I don't know, spooktacular, or I don't know, booberry, right? I'm still in the Halloween mode, I guess.
Yeah.
So those are interesting lexical items that appear in advertising. But they don't have to be on the word formation level only. Like, there is a lot of lexical ambiguity, let's say, in ads, which is also quite intriguing. Like, I don't know, your wife is hot, why don't you get an air conditioner? Things like that. So as you can tell, so those techniques that advertisers use, they are just really clever, witty, and therefore interesting for people like me. And for those people who know my academic research background, they know that I am very intrigued by lexical innovations. So that's from the point of view of linguistics. From the point of view of consumerism, well, as a consumer, I should say that we all know that language in advertising does have an impact on our choices, on our decisions. And there is a lot of research-based evidence for this claim. And so if it is impactful, then I feel that it is necessary and it is interesting to study how it works and how persuasion happens by means of language in advertising.
Yeah, you brought up some interesting points and concepts. What is it that is so interesting about this lexical side, as you say? What is that? Can you maybe explain it to the listeners listening to this podcast?
Well, yes, sure. So for those who don't operate the terminology, so lexemes are basically words, right? So what I was talking about is how new words are created in advertisements, just kind of for the sake of attracting attention. Like not so long ago, I came across a word like unputdownable in an ad for a publisher, if I'm not mistaken. Right, so it's just a very unusual word, and it's interesting how people come up with those words, or at least it's interesting for me, and how they are processed, whether people understand them or not, and what impact they have on the audience.
Can you give a couple of examples of what devices are used, or language devices are used in advertisements? On top of my head, I know that Nike, for example, uses "Just Do It," which is what they call a triplet. There are three simple words, and
Yeah.
there is some sort of a structure to that. Yeah. Do you know any other devices similar to this one?
Yeah, well, sure. You brought up Nike and Just Do It. So, one of the characteristics of advertisements is the use of so-called non-assertions, right? So just do it would be an example of imperative mood in the sentence, right? So it's like a command encouraging people to do something. And that's something that differentiates ads, from the language which is used to, I don't know, for example, to inform or to educate, where there is a more canonical structure with the subject, predicate, and so on to communicate the information, right? And so ads tend to be more kind of actionable, and there is much less room for language in an ad compared to our everyday communication. Well, if we talk about linguistic devices in general, Dusan, just the fact that I'm talking to you kind of primes me to talk about presuppositions, right? Because I told you, I feel that you are a master of presuppositions. And for those who are not familiar with the term, I'll just explain and provide an example. So in our conversation with Dusan about this interview, Dusan invited me, and in the first email, he said something like, before our interview, I'll send you a Zoom invite or something like this. Which, if you think about it, when he says our interview, it kind of suggests that there is an interview to talk about, right? And if he says before our interview, it again implies that there's an interview that's been scheduled, right? So that first invitation kind of had this mood as if it already has been agreed upon, right? So this is an example of a presupposition, which is the statement in which a certain linguistic trigger, like the pronoun our interview or the preposition before our interview, they trigger some sort of message. They suggest that something has been agreed upon. And so this is an effective persuasive technique which is used in advertising a lot. So I guess if I were to think of some examples, Dove uses those presuppositions a lot, for example, by saying something like claim your beauty or keep your skin looking healthy and vibrant, let's say, right? So here's another trigger, keep, that's a change of state verb, where people feel if you need to claim your beauty, this beauty already exists, right? Or if you have to keep your skin looking healthy, then it does look healthy now. And so here, first of all, you get this positive kind of feeling, right, and association with this ad. But also another advantage of using a technique like a presupposition is that, since there is a feeling that this is something that's been agreed upon, that this is some common knowledge, people are less likely to find some counter arguments to this, to this claim, all right? And so those are just some very positive example. There are examples. There are also some less positive examples, which are exemplifying really the aspirational advertising, which is here is what you can be like, right? So, for example, fight your wrinkles by doing this and that. So again, there's your wrinkles, so they exist. If you had to fight with them, then they are already there. So, well, this is just one technique that is often used in advertisements. And even though it feels pretty innocent on the surface, there is some experimental evidence showing that people who are exposed to presuppositions, so exposure to presuppositions really affects how people perceive and remember reality.
This is all very, very interesting. You mentioned a lot about the language of persuasion. Is that the main type of language used in advertising?
Yeah, well, if you think about advertisements in terms of the function of the language in them, then you'll understand that yes, basically the function of ads is persuasion, right? Which can be viewed in contrast to, for example, education. And I would say that maybe if you looked at ads kind of historically, if you compared old advertisements and new advertisements, you would see that there is a lot more language in the old ones compared to the new ones, where you'll sometimes find no language at all. Sometimes you'll find some, right? So there is, actually, I have to say that copywriters have to deal with this challenge of finding the right balance between some language and, too much of it. And there has been some research done where researchers looked at whether language is actually of benefit in advertisements. And they found that people prefer ads with language to ads without any language. But they also found that it only happens as long as there is not too much of it. Yeah, and so if you think about language of persuasion, it is different from language, for example, that is meant to educate people. And it's different along several dimensions. And, if we think about, let's say, education, when people are trying to deliver some message, they are trying to avoid things like ambiguity and obscurity at all costs, right? Because they need to get the message across. They often repeat the claims made, or the language is pretty repetitive. They use mostly assertions, as I said before. But in persuasive language, as you know, in ads, very often ambiguity is actually something preferred. And as I said at the beginning, lexical or syntactic ambiguity can often be found in ads just because it creates some additional associations and meanings and potentially attracts attention.
Hello, listeners. You're listening to Linguistically Aware, a spoken word program about language use. Today's guest is Svitlana Winters, and she has some amazing things to say about language in advertising. So let's keep listening. More exciting material is to come. Is ambiguity in advertisements always a good thing?
Having some ambiguity or some puzzle buried in the commercial or an ad in any sort of mode of delivery has a lot of advantages to it. So maybe let me give you an example. So you brought up Nike, and an ad that came to my mind as you were talking was, it's not a new one, it's pretty old, I think. It's one of Michael Jordan scoring a goal. So he was jumping up really high and scoring a goal. And so there were two lines in that ad. One said, Michael Jordan 1 point, Isaac Newton 0. Right? So
okay.
here the viewers would have to think a little bit, right, to get the message. So basically they have to find association, Isaac Newton, gravity, jumping, Michael Jordan, his shoes.
Yep.
And the alternative to presenting this message via implicature, if I use a linguistic term, the alternative would be to say something like, Nike shoes help Michael Jordan jump up high, and if somebody said that, the audience would very likely find some very convincing arguments against this claim, right? Because that's a ridiculous claim. But when they have to work on it to get that message, well, thing number one, they have already invested a lot of cognitive effort into figuring out the puzzle, and a lot less of cognitive resources are left for them to find some counter arguments now, right? Another advantage is that they really generated this meaning themselves. And we are much less likely to question something that we came up with ourselves, just as human beings.
Yeah, that's true. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
right. And well, one more argument I guess I can offer you is that perhaps when people looked at this ad and they reached the moment of insight, they understood what it's about. This moment of insight is usually accompanied by some pleasurable feelings about yourself, right, and your
Mhm.
smarts. And this positive feeling, this pleasure, will be associated with the product being advertised when you think about it in the future. So you see, there are many advantages, at least in my opinion, and there has been some experimental evidence again to support this, of using those really interesting ambiguous claims or
Mhm.
metaphors or any sort of implicature in advertising.
What's an implicature? All of the ads are basically implicatures, but can you
Mhm.
clarify that for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So implicature, it's basically this linguistic device which makes people, I would say, read between the lines,
Mhm.
right? So it is stating something that on the surface appears possibly irrelevant. And as a result, people are looking for the connection between the product itself, right, and the what is being said. So they read between the lines and they infer a meaning. But implicature usually arises from the violation of maxims of cooperative communication. If you look back at the Isaac Newton advertisement, so you will think, how is Isaac Newton relevant to
Mhm.
Nike shoes, right? So in this case, we see that a cooperative communicator would only mention something that is relevant to the product in question. And if something seems irrelevant on the surface, we're trying to then find the connection, find this relevance, right? And this is how we are looking for some meaning that is hidden in it.
I
Mhm.
wonder how aware are we of the language used in advertising?
Well, I think very similarly to how we are unaware of language we use in everyday life, in the
Mhm.
same way we are quite unaware of the language used in advertising. Like, and I feel it's just natural and normal. For example, how many people without any specialized training in linguistics do you know who can tell you, for example, when they use aspirated T's and P's, right? They just do it without really understanding how it works. So, in the
Yeah.
same way, people are exposed to ads and they understand them, or they create ads very often without really any understanding of the linguistic theory behind it and of the mechanisms. And I think it's true not only of an average person, but also just based on my experience of talking to some copywriters and
Mhm.
going through some training in this area. I feel that people who create ads, they don't always really understand how language in the ads really works. They simply follow their intuitions, and
Yeah.
often they hit the nail on the head, without really understanding the theoretical basis for their success.
Mhm.
Which is why I always say it's very good for advertising agencies to have at least one linguist on their staff who could help them figure it out and make sure that however they linguistically package the messages in their advertisements, that it will have the intended impact.
From the side of consumerism, is it important to raise awareness of the language or of the structure of these ads?
So I feel that it is important to raise awareness of how language is used in advertising simply because of the world we live in, right? We're exposed to
Mhm.
ads every step we go. So they are
Yeah.
everywhere, and attempts to persuade us are everywhere. And whether we want to admit it or recognize it or not, they do have an effect on our behavior.
Hmm.
So if something affects our choices, our behavior, I feel like it's important to understand how it works. And this knowledge will empower us to, as you said, resist the persuasion attempts, right? And have more control and more freedom in making our decisions and choices. However, I want to make a point here too that, advertising is not only about selling stuff,
Hmm.
and there are a lot of good things that can be done with advertising too. And I can provide some examples from my experience of working with students. And students at universities, they have this amazing creative potential that blows my mind, pardon
Yeah.
this expression. So in the course, and I'll just go back to your very first question about the course
Mhm.
language and advertising. So a part of this course is doing a group project. And some of my students, they did some amazing things, and they used their knowledge of linguistics to be persuasive in working towards what they feel makes the world a better place. Right. So, for example, there was one group. It was my first time teaching language and advertising. And so that group of students decided that they want to help an animal shelter in Medicine Hat to raise the adoption rates for cats. And so they created an advertising campaign, which was called Cats in the Hat referring to Medicine Hat,
Oh,
where they basically they mimicked the style of the famous book by Dr. Seuss, The Cat in the Hat,
yeah.
um, where they created rhymes for the cats in this shelter for every individual cat. And then they created some artwork which kind of mimicked the imagery of Dr. Seuss books. And they partnered with the local newspaper where they placed those ads for the cats.
Oh,
And they had
nice.
a 3 week, yeah, 3 week long campaign. And so as a result of that, I honestly don't remember the exact numbers, but I do remember that they increased the cat adoption rates by over 100%. And they
Wow.
also increased, yeah, their social media outreach by over 50% that way. And that's just one example. There are also some really good things that students were trying to do with their final projects. Like, for example, there was a project where students were trying to convince Canadians to visit museums more,
Mhm.
or to wear masks during the pandemic. Or there was a student who created some ads to convince kids to eat broccoli. And honestly, in my experience, it worked with my child. So
Wow,
I just want to
nice.
yeah, I just want to make a point that it is true that ads, most of them are trying to sell something, but they're not all evil, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes those persuasive campaigns, they are just trying to make the world a better place too.
My next question would be why ads don't always say what they mean or mean what they say. You mentioned a couple of nice examples about that.
Because this is how people communicate. And I'll give you an example. So as you and I were talking about the time for this interview, or this podcast, for example, I told you, 1 o'clock works best for me. And you told me, I have a meeting at 1 o'clock on Thursday, right? You didn't have to tell me I cannot have a meeting with you at 1 o'clock on Thursday, right?
Mm.
You said something totally different, right? But as as a sane person, I could infer that Dusan is
Yeah.
unavailable at this time, right? And so then we found a different time. Or like, for example, as I was going to log on and have this conversation with you, I told my husband, I have a meeting with Dusan in 2 minutes, which to him sounded like, wrap up whatever you're doing and take care of our daughter while I am doing this. So just generally speaking, this is simply how people communicate. And but ads, obviously, there are some advantages to communicating this way
Mm.
in advertising, right? And I guess I started talking about this when I brought up the whole Michael Jordan ad,
Mhm.
right? So when we don't really say directly what we mean, we present this cognitive puzzle for the audience, right? And then
Yeah.
as a result, the audience has to work on it, but then they remember it longer. If they work on it harder, they are less likely to find counter arguments. They are more likely to have some positive association with this whole thing. Another, of course, advantage is that sometimes it's possible for people in advertising to say something controversial, sometimes
Mhm.
maybe something scandalous, which obviously attracts attention without really saying it directly, right? And maybe even avoiding some sort of taking responsibility for those words because they were never actually said. Yeah, so that's kind of one point. You also started talking about subconscious and using appealing to the subconscious level
Mhm.
in advertising. I guess I just want to make another point here. It is true. So advertisers or copywriters are often trying to get below the surface of your consciousness. And one of the ways of doing that is by consistently creating an associative network between a certain product or a brand and some abstract concepts that are appealing to people.
Yeah.
And so the classic example that comes to my mind is the campaign done by Edward Bernays, who was actually Sigmund Freud's nephew. And so he led a campaign in which they were trying to get women to buy cigarettes and smoke them in public, which was considered to be a taboo, right? And he worked for Lucky Strikes on that project. So instead of persuading women to buy cigarettes, they approached it as persuading them to buy the torches of freedom, right? And it's a direct quote. So they
Oh,
called
okay.
cigarettes torches of freedom. So they used this metaphor there.
Yeah.
And this way, if they continued building that associative network, women would have the associations: cigarettes, equality, emancipation, freedom, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have that sort of associations built in your mind, then the priming effect occurs, right? So maybe, well, yeah. So I'll finish this and I'll give you a more contemporary example.
Yeah.
So, for example, when those women who were exposed to this campaign, and if it caught their attention, then we would say that once they looked at cigarettes, in their mind, the associations, as I said, freedom, equality, and so on,
Yeah.
would be activated, right? Or they would come to the surface of their mind. And the opposite also works. When they think about equality, emancipation, freedom, and so on, the association with cigarettes would also come up on their minds. But just because this is how priming works, this is how our subconscious works. And I guess a good contemporary example of building such associative networks would be Tim Hortons. So I don't know, Dusan, do you have any associations with Tim Hortons when you think about it?
I do. French vanilla and Timbits for sure.
Okay, so you are a coffee drinker.
Yeah,
Yep.
something sweet, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, you see, you and I, we were not born and raised in North America,
Yeah.
so we might not have the whole history of relationship with Tim Hortons, right? But some people I asked who were born and raised here, they talk about how, Tim Hortons is associated with all things Canadian to them. Obviously coffee, obviously
Mm-hmm.
Timbits, but also things like hockey and Wayne Gretzky and community and neighborhood and cold and toque and mittens, things
Oh
like
yeah.
that. Just because all those words are skillfully co-occurring in all sorts of communications coming from Tim Hortons over the years, right? And so they're building and strengthening this associative network that is now at a subconscious level in many people's minds who are exposed to this. So yeah, this is how it works. And even though there are some ethical issues with manipulating the subconscious, I do find this idea of equating a product or a brand or a service with some abstract concept really intriguing and interesting.
What is your take-home message for the listeners? Why should we care about language in advertisements or in marketing in general? And
Mm,
how should we pay more attention to it? Whether should we do that? That's also a question.
well, I guess the general suggestion for everybody is, if you have time and cognitive resources to pay attention and to approach messages that you are exposed to more analytically, then do that, right? Because as I said, we live in the world where we are surrounded by attempts to persuade us. And if we want to have more control over our decisions and over our choices, then it is good to understand how persuasion works and how language mechanisms or language tools are used to persuade us. So if you can, do some reading and just pay attention to what is being said to you, and this might give you some freedom.
That was Svitlana Winters, a phenomenal research analyst and a great expert in language and advertising. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the upcoming episodes of Linguistically Aware on CJSW 90.9 FM radio station.